Shalom brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today is part 4 of the Q&A series, where I do my best by the inspiration of the Ruach HaKodesh and the Most High's word to answer the questions that come in to me from you, the viewers. And so far we've had some good questions that have generated other studies and other topics, and obviously the answers have also generated follow-up questions, and these things are all very good for the mishpachah, because the likelihood is that if you have a question that you want to ask, there is somebody else out there also who has the same question. And so no question is a silly question, so to speak, but we do our best through the Ruach to go through as many of them as we can and give answers from a biblical standpoint. And so continuing in part 4, there was a follow-up question to an original question that was addressed in part 3, and that was to do with mixed marriages. So if you haven't seen that original question, I would suggest you watch the part 3. The link will be in the description, and I will go into the follow-up question now, which reads: great lesson, and I had a blessed time fellowshipping with everyone today. Brother Daniel, as you stated, the children of Yasharal were commanded to marry within their own specific tribes. I often hear that it is the man that determines if a person is Yasharal, and that it has nothing to do with the woman. If that be the case, why would the Most High command them to marry within their own tribes? If the man alone determines who is Yasharal, then it would mean that the men of Yasharal can marry any or all women of any Gentile nation. When the scriptures talked about establishing the pedigree according to the father, I thought it was, for example, when a woman from the tribe of Issachar would marry a man from the tribe of Naphtali, the pedigree of that family would be determined as Naphtali, the father's tribe. I'm not saying that I'm correct, just sharing my understanding. Peace and blessings. Praise, honor, and giving of thanks to Yahweh and his son Yahusha. And so this question is in relation to the man carrying the seed, and therefore the man being the one who determines the heritage of the child, because it is the seed that determines the heritage of the child. And what this beloved is asking is that if that is the case, if it is the seed that determines the heritage of the child, and we know the seed comes from the man, then why can't the man marry any woman he chooses regardless of the nation? Because that seed would still be a Yasharelite if it is the case that the man determines the heritage of the child and not the woman, or the woman doesn't play a part in it. And so the question is one that does need to be answered for context, but what we need to understand is, in all the things the Most High does, he does it with purpose. There's always a reason behind it. And the reason why that men are commanded to marry within their nation is because of a word called preservation. It is all about preserving what the Most High has established. Now, it is true that it is the seed that dictates the heritage of the child. It has absolutely nothing to do with the woman in terms of where that child is from. So, if a man, for example, is from the tribe of Yehuda and he marries somebody who is from the tribe of Levi, that child is going to be from Yehuda, even though the woman is from Levi. But the preservation of each tribe will continue if you marry into your original tribes. If a man from Yehuda marries a woman from Yehuda, so for example, if Yosef from Yehuda marries Miriam from Yehuda, Messiah's biological mother and his stepfather, then any of their offspring, as in the actual seed from Yosef, will continue to be from Yehuda, which is why Messiah's brothers or half brothers and sisters were all from Yehuda, because they came from Yosef's seed. And we know that Messiah was from Yehuda on the basis of from his mother, because in that one instance only it was the woman that was given seed, which we find in Genesis 3:15. So the seed came from the woman, and therefore the woman kind of stood in the place of the man. So it is still the man that dictates the heritage of the child. But in Messiah's case, Miriam was standing in the place of the man, because she was the one that was given the seed by the Ruach HaKodesh. And so the key thing to all of these marriages is to preserve the nation. So the things the Most High had set in order when the 12 tribes came, he wanted those tribes to be preserved by marrying into that tribe. Now, even though it is the seed of the man that dictates the heritage of the child, and even though if a man marries into another tribe, or even let's say into another nation, if a man, an Israelite man, marries into a Gentile nation, the child that is produced is going to be an Israelite, because it is the seed that dictates the heritage. But the preservation of that nation will start to diminish because of things like genetic modification and genetics diluting. And as the generations pass down and those dilution of genetics continue to happen, it makes the next generation weaker. And that's not just weaker from a physical perspective, but it's also weaker from a spiritual perspective, because the Most High in his wisdom knows how to preserve each nation. And so when the tribes were established and the Most High instituted marrying within, it was to preserve those tribes. Immediately as you go out of the nation and you start marrying into another nation, let's say a Gentile nation, the genetics of that child is going to become diluted and therefore weaker as time goes on, until you get to the point where you may have a child that has no heritage from being a Yasharelite, and visually you can't tell the difference. They may even look like a Gentile. We've seen an example of that on part 3. And so the preservation of the nation is why the men are supposed to marry into their own tribes, to continue that legacy, to continue that lineage. Now we have an example in Genesis chapter 38, where you see there were two brothers, a brother by the name of and a brother by the name of Onan. And these two brothers were from the tribe of Yehudah. And what happened is that one of the brothers, who was the name he passed away. He was wicked and the Most High slew him, the scripture says. And so then his brother, who was Onan, was told to take his wife and raise up seed to her, which would then be attributed to his brother. And Onan, I'll just read in verse 9, knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, when he went into his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. And verse 10 says, and the thing which he did displeased Yahweh, wherefore he slew him also. So both brothers died. The first brother died because he was wicked. And when the second brother came along, he was instructed that he should marry his previous brother's wife, so that the seed can be raised up to his previous brother, because his previous brother didn't have any children with that woman. And so that was how the nation would be preserved, because obviously the two brothers were from the same tribe. They were both from the tribe of Yehudah, because they're from the father, and the seed, it dictates the heritage of the child. So the two brothers were from Yehudah, but because the first brother didn't have any children with the wife, the second brother, when the first brother died, was supposed to take the woman and raise up seed for his brother. And that was to preserve the nation, to continue that tribe. But you see what he did, that when he had intercourse with her and spilled his seed on the ground. And therefore, by doing that, he would not raise up seed to his brother, because the scripture says he knew that that seed would be raised up to his brother. And this thing displeased Yahweh, and he struck him down, and he died also. So you see, all of these things are about preservation, preserving the nation that the Most High has established, preserving the tribes. And so this is why these things are done. you have a similar example of a scenario that is given to Messiah by the Sadducees when they're trying to find out about the resurrection of the dead that they don't believe in. The scripture will tell you exactly what happened, but you see they give a scenario of a wife, and I think it was 7 brothers, that each of those brothers never had children with that woman, and when they died, the next brother came along and was supposed to raise up seed for the original brother. And then they say, well, if all of them die in the resurrection, whose wife would she belong to? Because all 7 brothers have had her. And obviously they were in error because they didn't understand that in the resurrection there is no marriages and those sort of things, that is no longer required. And Messiah puts them straight. But the point is that it was a known thing for people to raise up seed to their brother if their brother didn't have any children with that woman. It was a known thing that their brother would come along, and the children that brother would produce would then be attributed to the first brother that has passed away. And all of these things are about preservation and preserving the nation and keeping the tribes intact. So yes, the man does have the seed, and yes, it is the man seed that dictates the heritage of the child. But if he was to go and marry into another nation, then that preservation of his nation and his lineage would be lost, and it would start to be diluted. And though the children produced would be obviously Yasharelites through the virtue of that man, but the actual nation, the genetics and all the things behind it would start to diminish. And that's exactly what we see today. That's the exact reason why the Most High had to do this, have this statute in place to avoid where we're at today. And now where we're at today means the Most High is going to have to reset things, and this is something he's going to do starting in the gathering, the second Exodus, and also into the millennial kingdom, when all these things will be reset so that we can do them properly, and the nations will be preserved and the tribes will be preserved and continue. That's the whole point of it. And then the other point is that just as it is today, generally speaking, and I'm speaking generally, but this is a biblical fact, that the mother and father of the child, it was always the woman that would be the nurturer. It's always the woman that would spend the most time with that child and bring up that child and raise up that child. So if a man was marrying into another nation who did not have the statutes and commands of what the Most High had put in place, then that child was not going to be brought up in the correct way according to Torah. That child was going to be influenced by other nations' beliefs and customs and their Elohims that they served. Similar thing to what happened with Solomon when he married all these women that led him astray and away from the Most High's rules and statutes and commands. And the scripture says that you should train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. And of course that scripture is referring to the education of the child from the father and the mother, from both parents. But realistically speaking, in those times and even today, many of the times it was the men that would go out and work. They were the breadwinners, and sometimes they would be away for various periods of time, so the child would be with the woman. And if that woman was not a Yasharelite and not from that tribe, then that woman would not raise that child in the right way. And then again, it goes back to preservation. That nation would start to diminish and start to go away from things. And the exact thing we are seeing now in today's society, where people that are Yasharelites don't even know who they are, they don't know their customs, they don't know their heritage, they don't know all these things. And yes, many of these things have been hidden because of the things and the effects of Deuteronomy 28. But it's also about preservation, that we were not trained in the way we should go. And so now that when we are old, many of us have departed from these precepts. Whereas if we were marrying into our nation, then the women would continue to train us as the way we should go according to Torah, and we would then be obedient to it as we grow up, and then pass that on to our children, and it would continue, and the preservation of the nation and the tribes would be maintained. So it is definitely the fact that it's the seed that dictates the heritage of the child. But mixed marriages was not permitted because of preservation of the nation and the tribes. If you study the book of Enoch, you'll see that many of the nations had watchers assigned to them, i.e. the angelic beings that were supposed to oversee them. And many of those fallen angels started to teach those nations evil things. And so the nation then becomes corrupt. And if you marry into that nation, like we see what happened with Solomon, that the women of those nations are going to lead you astray, and they have the biggest influence over the children, especially from a young age, because they're the nurturers. And that's why you see Messiah, when he was born to Miriam, his mother, the Most High selected her specifically because she was from the tribe of Yehuda and she was a servant of Yah. He knew that she would diligently do all the things that she was supposed to do according to the customs of the Torah. So therefore Messiah would be raised the correct way from his mother and also from the stepfather Yosef, who was also from Yehuda. So there was no conflict of interest because that child was raised in the household of one from Yehuda. And so he knew all the customs and traditions as a Yehudi from his mother, his biological mother, and also from his stepfather, Yosef. So that's why these statutes were put in place, to preserve the nation and ensure that the children are raised in the way that they should go, so that when they're old, they will not depart from it. So another question that came in said, "Thank you for another phenomenal lesson. I had been looking forward to this one all week. I also appreciated your answer on the first question of should we date outside our race. This was covered in part 3. I do, however, have more questions that I would like to get more understanding on. In one of your older videos, you spoke on why the tribe of Dan was missing from the 144,000. Will you cover this in more depth? I don't think I need a whole segment or anything, just a few words or scriptures will help." And the second question, do you have any spiritual insight on how the seed of the fallen arose again after the flood? So let me deal with the second question first. After the flood, we know that all the Nephilim were wiped out. There were only 8 souls that remained, Noah and his children. And the question being asked is, after this flood, how then were the fallen able to manipulate their seed and put them back on this earth? How did we come to start in having things like Goliath again and all these giants that were clearly Nephilim? How did they come back if the flood got rid of everyone, minus Noah and his family? And so, as we know, the scripture says that as it were in the days of Noah, so will it be in the coming of the days of the Son of Man, the days that we are in now. So there will be a repetition now. So if we want to answer that question, all we have to do is we need to look at what's going on now to see how did that seed manage to come back. And we know now one of the biggest things that they're doing is the merging of man with technology, or the merging of man and the modification of man's genetics. And they do these things through various gene therapies, various scientific procedures that they undergo. They will use a human being's DNA to try and modify and change things. And they don't have all the answers, so many of these things are trial and error. But all the things that you are seeing today that are going on from a scientific point of view, the modification of genes through things like vaccines or through things like food and water and all these things, is what they were doing back in those times in order to modify the seed. And if we read in the book of Enoch, we'll see that many of the fallen angels taught various spells and enchantments and things to the daughters of men, so that they would be able to corrupt themselves. And it is only the fallen angels that had sexual intercourse with the women that were held in chains, that were removed from the scene, so to speak. But many of the other fallen angels who were part of teaching the women and even the men some of these things to modify DNA, they are still free in inverted commas. They are not in chains because they didn't physically violate that law. The ones that physically violated have been removed. And so the same way back then that they taught daughters of men to do certain things is the same way they are doing it today. And there are some things when you read in the Apocrypha and you look at even things like makeup, for example, where they taught the women certain things, how to beautify their eyelids and to beautify their eyes. All these things were part of corrupting their genealogy. And that might seem strange. How can something like makeup do that? But when you start to mix things like artificial hair and all these things that have spells and enchantments on it, there is a repercussion. That's one of the reasons why the Most High is very accurate when it comes to the things that we should and should not do, because he knows there is a reason. And like I said before, the Most High is purposeful with everything he does. So a lot of these things that were happening back then, they were not just innocent. They had a sinister reasoning behind it. And many of us today look at it and just think, oh no, these are just cosmetics and these are just things that are to make us feel better. But we don't actually understand the root causes behind it. And I'm not saying that every type of makeup or anything like that has evil roots behind it, but you have to look at how it's originating and what was the intent. The intent wasn't to make one more attractive on its own. There was an intention as to why to make one more attractive. There was something that they were doing, and it was all a form of worship and a form of idolatry, so to speak, to corrupt. And we just follow on suit thinking that these things are all right. They do have a origin as to why they came into play. And so a lot of the things that these fallen angels taught those children back then were to have repercussions, to affect them and to make them less connected to the Most High. And the more and more you disconnect one with the Most High, there is the evil one, the God of this world, that will then try to connect with you to replace the Most High. And that has always been his goal. And so you see many of these things that might seem innocent in some ways, when you do further studies on them and you look into how they came about and their origins and what their intent and purpose were, you see that they were all for sinister and wicked reasons. And today, because we lack knowledge and because we lack understanding, we just think, oh, these things have no repercussion. But if we knew the origins of them, if we really understood where they came from and what their intent purposes were, we wouldn't have anything to do with them. But these are some of the things that when the Most High straightens things out, they're going to be removed. And then we're going to understand why. We'll not only have the knowledge, we will also have the understanding. And then we will apply the wisdom by doing the thing that the Most High tells us to do, or not doing the thing that he tells us not to do. So the question is, how did these Nephilim, so to speak, get back on the earth after the flood? It was the modification of genetics, not through sexual intercourse, because the fallen angels could not directly continue to violate that law, because they know the repercussion is that they would be held in chains, as it says in the book of Jude. So they stopped doing it that way. But through science and through other things, through spells, through enchantments, they started to work out how to corrupt the gene pool of a man and how to modify the genetics and the DNA through gene therapy and all these things that you see a variation going on today. These were the things that they were doing. And in some cases they failed, and in some cases they were successful. And then you see when people were born, that they started to have these Nephilim-like traits and started to grow as giants because of these genetic modification. And we are seeing the very same thing today, and we are going to see in the very near future many of these genetics modified that are going to start becoming apparent. And also when these things take place, then it's going to be obvious that these things produced are not mankind or human beings, because they're going to be very different. And it will be obvious that that's because of gene therapy. Now, another point that is often overlooked is that when the flood took place, obviously the flood got rid of all the Nephilim that were on the earth. And after the flood was over, though the Nephilim were physically dead because they were drowned, but if you read in the book of Enoch, the Most High said that the Ruachs of the Nephilim would not go down to Sheol, but they would remain on the earth. In other words, they would still be roaming on the earth without a physical body. The physical body is now dead, but as a punishment to those Ruachs, they would remain on the earth. And for a Ruach, a spirit being, to not have possession of a body but be consigned to the earth is a torture, because they can't physically do anything. They have no power, they have no physical attributes to influence. So all they can do is influence the mind of somebody who has a physical body, but they still can't control the person, because if the person is able to withstand that influence, then they have no power. So it is a torment for them, and that's why they were assigned to the earth and not to be put into Sheol, awaiting the day of judgment. And so many of these Ruachs that we would refer to nowadays as demons come from the Nephilim. And so because they're on the earth, when they were able to influence those people who were not of the Most High, they were able to get them to do their will. And many of them were able to possess those bodies and then become sort of a Nephilim within a human being, if that makes any sense. If you think about the legion that Messiah cast out of the man, and it was a group of demons that classed themselves as legion because they were many. When they came out of that man, they begged Messiah to allow them to go into the pigs, because from their point of view, it's better for them to be in the pigs, which is a physical body, than to be roaming on the earth without any physical body. And so Messiah allowed them to go into the swine, and you see the swine ran into the sea and drowned themselves. But those Ruachs had a physical body. And so a similar thing is happening today, or happened after the flood, that once those Ruachs that had no physical body, if they were able to possess a body, when Messiah found those Ruachs, they were in a man that he had to cast them out of. So they had possessed a body. And you see in the scripture, I think it mentions that that man was very strong, and though they used to chain him up, he used to break away from the chains and cut himself. He sort of had super strength because of those Ruachs that were dwelling in him, those evil Ruachs, which were the Ruachs of the Nephilim. And so that's how they came back to the earth, because of therapy, gene modification, but also those Ruachs, when they were able to possess a body and able to inhabit that body and get that body to do certain things, they were able to regenerate themselves. And today we still have Nephilim walking amongst us, as it's been covered before. But many of those Nephilim are not the same as the ones that were back in those days, because they've been diluted, because they've been intimate with women, and they've been producing their offspring, and each generation that comes along becomes weaker. So to the point now where many of the Nephilim that walk amongst us are inferior to the ones of before, because they've been diluted all the way down to the 10th or 20th generation, whatever it might be today. So yeah, there's multiple ways how the seed of the fallen came back onto the earth. And it wasn't through sexual intercourse, because they now know that if they ever do that again, the Most High will do the same thing he did back then. He will put them in chains, and they will not have any authority on this earth. So that's why they have found another way around it. And the same thing that went on back then is the same thing going on today, using technology, using AI, using various gene modification and things that they would class as pharmakia if you read in the Greek in Revelation 18, it tells you what pharmakia is. Pharmakia is medication, and mixed with sorcery and all these things that they were doing back then and are doing today. And the result is the same. They are producing Nephilim through those means, rather than the direct means of sexual intercourse from the fallen angels, because they know what that would result in. Now, the first question about the tribe of Dan, I had a source from the Apocrypha, which is called the Testament of Dan. In that Testament of Dan, it literally showed me exactly what I studied without me ever reading it prior. It told me about Dan and how Dan fell, because you said you wanted a couple of scriptures, and I will see if I'm able to take a picture of it, if it will be in focus, and then I will put it on the screen so you can do a screenshot and read it for yourself. It's got all the 12 tribes and their history. Quite a good source that I believe is part of the Apocrypha. So I'll put that on the screen and you can have a look through it. And that tells you why Dan was the tribe that was omitted. When we come to Revelation chapter 7, we don't see them in the 144,000. And I don't believe that all the people from Dan were excluded, because there are some righteous people, I'm sure, amongst that tribe, but they would have been reassigned to other tribes, but that tribe itself was lost. So not necessarily the people within the tribe, because individuals can make their own decision to do right rather than do wrong, but the tribe as a whole was removed because of some of the things that are listed in that source, and hopefully that will give you what you're looking for. So I have a few questions about the feasts or the calendar. So I have one question here which says, "Hi brother, how do you count for the feast days?" And I have another question. This was on the back of the Lunar Sabbath teaching, which led to two questions from that, which was number one, which month and day would be according to a 364-day calendar. So basically, what date would the 364 calendar be on the current Gregorian date? And does each day, and more specifically the Sabbath, begin at sunrise? Now, I pointed the beloved to a previous teaching that I did with Brother Otis, telling you when the Shabbat begins, talking of the time. On that particular teaching, we were not going into the days of the week, because we knew that the Lunar Sabbath issue had to be addressed first. And so now the Lunar Sabbath issue has been addressed through a teaching, and in fact there is a follow-up teaching, which by the time you're seeing this part 4 of the Q&A should have already been out. So I will leave the link in the description for the follow-up teaching, which further goes on to disprove the Lunar Sabbath, but shows you how the calendar works. And that teaching will probably answer quite a few of these questions. But the teaching on when does the Shabbat start was a teaching, as I said, myself and Brother Otis did a few months ago, and that will be left in the description to show you that the Sabbath will always start during the daylight periods, as in the weekly Sabbath is always during the day. And whilst I address all of these questions through the teaching that has now been released, which you should have seen, again the links will be in the description, there will be a link to it at the end of this video. So if you watch this video to the end, you should have a link to that. It might be worth going over a point that we see about the beginning of the day. We know in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 that the Most High starts to create, because as his Ruach hovers across the face of the deep, it is in darkness and void without form. And so when he starts to create in verse 3 by saying, let there be light, we know that prior to him making this creation and making this command, there was darkness. Meaning that when the Most High started to create, he started to create in darkness, because the earth was void and without form. And that's why the first thing he did was he called for light, so that there could be light on the earth. And we see that when the light came and he divided the day and night, using the light for the day and the darkness for the night, we see that he says in verse 5 that the evening and the morning were the first day. So the evening came first and then the morning. The reason why the evening came first is because it was already dark when he called for there to be light. So the darkness was first, which was classed as the evening. Then when the light came, when he called for there to be light, that was classed as the morning. So the full period from evening to morning, which would be the darkness period up until the morning light, and then the full period from the morning up until the evening, which would be the light period up until the darkness at night, became the first day. So that made a 24-hour day, the evening and the morning. And so because of this, we know that the creation, when it talks about the days of each day that we go through, that the evening or the darkness period comes first. It is dark, then it gets light. In our day of reconciling things in this system, we always consider it that this the daytime first, and then after the daytime comes night. But it's actually the other way around, which means that when it comes to all the feast day, the weekly Shabbat, and even the high day feast, the actual feast day is observed in the second part of the day, and the second part of the day is the daylight hours, since the first part of the day is the nighttime hours, which is the evening time. And we see that on all the feasts, that when they kept the feast, they would keep them during the day, the 12-hour from sunrise to sunset. And the only exception for this was the Day of Atonement, when the feast day started from the evening before. So even though the feast started on the 10th day of the 7th biblical month, but the instruction was to keep it from the 9th, the evening of the 9th, all the way through to the evening of the 10th. There was a distinction made, because the Most High knew that that day would be a 24-hour fasting period, and that fast would start from the evening of the previous day and continue to the evening of the next day. So that was a distinction made. And also Passover itself was a feast that was always kept in the evening or at night. But Passover itself isn't actually a high day, because on Passover the high day is the unleavened bread, which is the day after, or the next day from Passover, the 15th of the month, instead of the 14th of the first biblical month. And so apart from those two exceptions, all the other feast days, including the weekly Sabbath, are always kept in the second part of the day, which is the daytime part of the day, the 12-hour period. And this is something we really do need to get understanding of, and hopefully the teaching that's been released will help, because it is going to be one of the signs in the end times how the Most High is going to distinguish his people, those keeping the Shabbat, that those keeping it according to how he instructs will show as a sign that you are part of the Most High, because there are many variations of people that keep the Shabbat, either from sunset to sunset, which is 24-hour period, not in accordance to Torah, or from sunrise to sunrise, again another 24-hour period over 2 separate days, not in accordance to Torah. There are many different variations, but the true variation is from sunrise on the 7th day to sunset on the 7th day, roughly a 12-hour period, where Yahusha makes this statement in the book of Yochanan, where he says, are there not 12 hours in the day? And it is during the day that a man must do what needs to be done, because at the night time they will stumble, because it is dark. And that is a clue for us to know these things. But hopefully you have seen the teaching now on the when does the Shabbat start, and also hopefully you've seen the more recent teaching, which again will be linked at the end of this video. If Yah is willing, I'm working at the moment on the calendar and putting in the feast days. I believe that I now have the correct format for the calendar, and then putting in the feast days and seeing how it lines up with the Gregorian calendar, and potentially that will then become a working calendar that I use. So I'm still in prayer to the Most High for more understanding of this, of exactly how to do it, because I believe the calendar is now in place. The feast days, putting those in the calendar should be easy because that's just according to scripture. But then it's the reconciling that calendar with the Gregorian calendar and then following it accordingly. And that's where, by Yah's grace, before the first day of the first biblical month, which is approximately in about 5 weeks time, 4 weeks time, by the time we get to that stage, then I'm praying that we will have a working calendar that is at least biblical and according to the scriptures. There's enough scripture, enough evidence, enough line upon line of the things the Most High has restored for us in the Apocrypha to be able to come to a calendar that does not contradict the scriptures, which is always key. The scriptures must always come first. So that's being worked on at the moment. But please do watch those teachings on the lunar Sabbath, the first one, the second follow-up, and also when the Shabbat starts, as in time-wise. I'll leave all the links in the description for those teachings on this video for your understanding. Let's go to another question. Brother Daniel, in the book of Job, chapter 3, verse 25, was Hasatan able to torment Job because he had fear in his heart? I know the Most High Yahweh allowed Hasatan to torment Job. My question is, did the Most High Yahweh do so to reveal to Job his secret fear? Thank you. All praises to the Most High Yahweh. So here we have a question on Job, a story, a book that I love because of the detail and showing the patience of Job, as people say. And I love the story of Job. I have covered Job before on a separate teaching, and what I may do is I may cut and paste part of that teaching onto this question to give further insight into this story about Job. But let's look at the actual verse itself that the beloved is talking about, which is Job chapter 3 and verse 25, where it says, "For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me." And so if we know the story of Job, we know Job was a righteous man who was afflicted by Hasatan in various ways, and Hasatan was trying to get Job to sin against the Most High, but Job retained his integrity. And the question the beloved asking is that, was the Most High using the situation with Hasatan to bring about the knowledge to Job that he had fear in his heart, or did he have a secret fear in his heart? Let us just remind ourselves in Job chapter 1 of how Job was described. Chapter 1 and verse 1. It reads, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, one that feareth Allah and escheweth evil." So we see that he was described as perfect and upright, who feared the Most High and kept himself away from evil. So that's how we are introduced to Job. And now let's hear what the Most High says about Job. If we go to the same chapter 1, and let's look at verse 8, where it says, "And Yahweh said unto Hasatan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth Allah and escheweth evil?" So the Most High is describing Job in the exact same manner, that he fears him, the Most High, and he retains his integrity because he is perfect and upright, and he refrains from evil. He keeps himself away from evil. So we see that Job is described as a righteous man. And we see a further description of this same kind in chapter 2, when the Most High speaks to Hasatan again and repeats the same thing after Job has been tested and lost all his children and his businesses and his livestock. And he says, despite all that you did to him, you still see he retains his integrity. So the question is, we read the scripture in Job chapter 3 and verse 25 that he said, the thing that I feared most has come upon me. So if this man is such an upright man, as the Most High has described him on multiple occasions, why would he be afraid? What would he fear? And this is where we need to get understanding that the thing that Job feared the most, which he in his own words said had come upon him, wasn't his righteousness or his lack of righteousness, but he was afraid of that what would come upon him because of the unrighteousness of his family. Now, if we study the story of Job, we will know that Job's wife is the one who tried to encourage Job to curse the Most High and die. We see this at the end of him being afflicted for the second time, after all his children and livestock and businesses are lost and killed. And then after Hasatan strikes him with boils all over his body, you see Job's wife says to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse the Most High and die. And this was Hasatan speaking through the woman. He used the woman as a vessel to speak through, to encourage Job to sin and curse the Most High. And of course, Job didn't do that. So this shows that the character of the wife was not righteous, because she was easily used by Hasatan. And so Job knew this, being married to her. He knew what she was like. He knew her character. He knew her weakness, and even said that you speak as one as a foolish woman speaks. And so Job's fear was that the unrighteousness of his wife and the unrighteousness of his children is what would bring to pass his demise. Now, if we go back to Job chapter 1 and we read from verse 4, it says that, and his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed Allah in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. So you see, Job was sacrificing animals on their behalf continually, in case they had cursed the Most High, in case they had sinned in their heart. Meaning that he feared, he had a feeling, he knew their unrighteousness, so to speak. And it says that when they were feasting each one his day, which I believe is their birthdays, when they were celebrating these occasions, Job was concerned. So Job knew the character of his children. And that is why he was sending sacrifices for them to cover their sins, should they have sinned against the Most High. So Job was aware of the situation of his family, i.e. his wife and his children. And that's why when all these things happened and all these things were said and done, Job said that the thing I feared most has come upon me. Of course, he didn't fear about his righteousness, because he knew his standing with the Most High, but it was for those around him. And this is one of the reasons why The hedge of protection that was around Job, the thing that Hasatan describes, is that Job hedge of protection extended to his family. It wasn't their own righteousness that covered them. It was Job's righteousness that extended to his family. And so when Job went through the testing with Hasatan, the Most High said that Hasatan had free reign to do what he willed on the family. And that was because they were unrighteous, not that they had Job's hedge of protection around them anymore. The Most High allowed Hasatan to afflict them. The only one who was not allowed to be afflicted by taking his life was Job, because Job's righteousness, as it says in Ezekiel 14:14, that Job, Noah, and Prophet Daniel, their righteousness, they were like the most righteous men found, and even their righteousness could only save them in that evil day. It wouldn't extend to others. So you see, Job knew these things about his family. He knew the character of his wife. He knew the character of his children. And that's why he did these things on their behalf. In the case of his children, that he sanctified them through burnt offerings, which he offered up to the Most High to cover their sin. And so when all these things happened to Job, this was the thing that he feared. He feared that this thing would eventually happen, that something would happen to him because of what his wife and his children were like, because of their character. And that he makes this quite plain. But we see the Most High in his mercy protected them for Job's sake. And when this affliction happened with Hasatan, and Job's children were eventually killed, and later on in the story, we don't see of Job's wife anymore. We find out that another wife is given to him, where he has even more children, and they were named as the most beautiful daughters in the land of Oz. So we see Job has a new wife, which indicates that his previous wife at some point passed away. And so I believe what the Most High was doing by turning evil into good is he was using Hasatan's wickedness to cleanse Job of that situation, and then blessed him with even more children and another wife and all his livestock and all the things that he lost in double measure. So the Most High used the evilness of Hasatan to bless Job. But Job had a fear in his heart, and the fear was not about him. The fear was about those who were around him, his wife, his children. And the scripture, when we put them together and we build up the story, we can see that they did not have Job's righteousness. They were just covered by extension. Because Job was such a righteous man, the Most High covered them on Job's behalf. But when Hasatan came with the affliction, the Most High removed the hedge of protection around them, because obviously he had put it around Job and around their sake for Job's benefit. But once the affliction came, the Most High used that opportunity to cleanse the situation of these unrighteous people and replace them with righteous sons and daughters, and obviously the wife, the new wife that Job would inherit. So it's the only explanation as to why Job would have had fear in his heart, because it wouldn't have been about him, because we see how he was viewed by the Most High. It was about those around him. And despite Job's way of being upright and perfect, that did not extend to his family. And we can see that by the actions that he was taking. Because if he knew his children were raised in the right way through him and his wife, he wouldn't have been worried about them sinning against the Most High, because they would have had their own relationship with the Most High. But it appears that Job's wife was not of that character. And so the way how those children were raised always caused Job worries about what they were doing and were they sinning against the Most High. Hence he was sacrificing on their behalf to cover their sin without them even knowing. And of course with his wife, we see what happened during the story, that she told Job he should curse the Most High and die, which obviously shows that she was not for the Most High after going through those afflictions. So Job had this fear in his heart, and it came to pass. But the Most High used the evil that Hasatan did for good, because after removing these characters from Job's life, as harsh as a story as it is, he replaced them with more sons, more daughters, more livestock. He literally doubled everything Job had. All that Job lost, he got it back in double measure. And so the Most High blessed him through that means. So when you put these things all together, you can kind of see the picture that Job was in, that his family were in, and that they were only covered for his righteousness up until the point of affliction. And that's when the Most High removed the protection. And that's why Job said, the thing I feared the most has come upon me, because he feared in his heart, because of the character of his wife and his children, that one day something would happen to them and to him for their sake. And that's exactly what happened. And the same way that Job had a hedge of protection around him which extended to his family, when they were afflicted, because the hedge of protection was removed, the affliction also fell on to Job, i.e. he ended up getting sick, because the Most High removed that hedge of protection around him, knowing he would still retain his integrity and he would still be the servant of Yah. Like Job said, even though Yah slay me, yet I will trust in him. What a remarkable character and lesson we can learn from someone of that stature. I will paste the rest of the Job teaching from a previous teaching. Wasn't actually to do with Job, but I will paste it onto the video so you can see the rest of the breakdown of that situation with Job and his wife. So Job chapter 1 verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared Allah and eschewed evil. Dropping down to verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of Allah came to present themselves before Yah, and Hasatan came also among them. And Yah said to Hasatan, Whence comest thou? Then Hasatan answered Yah and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And Yah said unto Hasatan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth Allah and escheweth evil? Then Hasatan answered Yah and said, Does Job fear Allah for naught? Has not thou made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all them that has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hand, and his substance is increased in thy land. But put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse thee to thy face. And Yah said unto Hasatan, Behold, all that he has is in his power. Only upon himself put not forth thy hand. So Hasatan went forth from the presence of Yah. Now I'm not going to read the rest of the verses from 13 downwards, but if you know the story of Job, if not, do read it in your own time. We've seen the first part that happened, and then Job was put through a series of tests where he lost his children, where he lost his business, his livestock, his servants. All of them were killed in various ways, which the scriptures from verse 13 down to verse 19 describe. He was filled with calamity because the Most High allowed Hasatan to attack him. And the only thing that the Most High said Hasatan could not do is he said that Job's life could not be touched. He could do anything else he wanted, i.e. all that he had was in his power, but Job himself could not be touched. So after doing all these things, with Hasatan trying to get Job to curse the Most High to his face, which is what he said to him in verse 11, you see Job's response in verse 20. So after all these dramas, after all these things have happened, Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. You see his response? He worshipped. Job is a remarkable character. And in verse 21 it says, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. Yah gave, and Yah have taken away. Blessed be the name of Yah. And in all this Job sinned not, nor charged Allah foolishly. So we see that Job's response was one filled with integrity, and despite the heartache that he had been through, despite the heartache and the drama and the loss that he had, which was unimaginable to us. Imagine losing everything, including your children. You can't imagine it. You just cannot imagine it. Yet Job retained his integrity. He blessed the Most High. He worshipped the Most High in all of that. And he did not sin or charge Allah foolishly, speak silly things. He still retained his love for the Most High. Now, let's read in Job chapter 2, where it says, "And again there was a day when the sons of Allah came to present themselves before Yah, and Hasatan came also amongst them to present himself before Yah. And Yah said unto Hasatan, From whence comest thou? And Hasatan answered Yah, and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And Yah said to Hasatan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth Allah and escheweth evil, and still he holds fast his integrity. Thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. And Hasatan answered Yah and said, Skin for skin, ye all that a man has will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And Yah said to Hasatan, Behold, he is in thy hands, but save his life. So Hasatan went forth from the presence of Yah, and smote Job with sores and boils from the sole of his feet unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down amongst the ashes. Then his wife said unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse Allah and die. But he said unto her, Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of Allah, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. Now let's expound this and have a look at some things for context. Now, it was the Most High that brought Job to the attention of Hasatan, not the other way round. The Most High only gives you what you can bear. So he knew Job's ability to withstand, and that's why Job was put up for testing. There's a saying, a biblical saying, that they say you need to have the patience of Job, because Job's patience was immeasurable. That despite being put up to all that affliction, he still stood firm in his faith and his belief. And this is comfort for us to know that it's the Most High that is in control when we are tempted. When we are under affliction, it is not Hasatan choosing to do what he wants. He is set with parameters. The Most High is the one who decides what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Now, it appears that Hasatan had considered doing Job harm before, because he knew Job had a hedge of protection around him. This is an observation Hasatan made to the Most High, that he has a protection around him. So it appears that Hasatan knew or tried to afflict Job, but was unable, because the Most High didn't give go-ahead. Again, more comfort and confirmation for us to know that the Most High is always in control. And it was Hasatan that said that Job would curse the Most High to his face. That was almost like the bet Hasatan was saying, well, if you allow me to afflict him, he will curse you to your face. So the Most High did. He did allow him, but he set the parameters as to what Job could be tested with, not Hasatan. In both occasions, he told Hasatan, all Job has is with your power, but do not touch his life. So first of all, Hasatan could not touch his life, and he couldn't do any sickness to him. So he did all the other things possible. And then the next time Hasatan said, well, the only reason he hasn't cursed you to your face is because he still has his health. But if you take that from him, he will curse you to your face. And again, the Most High said, do what you want to his health, but you can't take his life. So again, we see that the Most High is very, very consistent with his defense of his own. He is in control, and he set the parameters as to what Job could do, not Hasatan. Now let's consider this thing, that despite all the calamities that happened to Job, it says he never sinned or charged Allah foolishly. When he was first afflicted and lost all his children and his business, his livestock, his servants, all his possessions, he never sinned or charged the Most High foolishly. Now, after Job's first round of testing, the Most High said to Hasatan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man that fears Allah and escheweth evil, and still holds fast his integrity, although you moved me against him to destroy him without cause?" Now listen to the Most High's words. He's said all these things before the first round of testing, and now he adds to it. He said, and despite all of this, he still holds fast his integrity, although you moved me against him, i.e. to attack him, to destroy him without a cause. We know what Hasatan's response was. Now notice one thing, that Hasatan had dominion over Job. The only thing he couldn't do was to take his life. And he killed all his children. He killed all his servants and his maidservants. He killed all his animals and his livestock. But he didn't kill or touch his wife. Job's wife was not under the hedge of protection. The Most High never said you can't do anything to her. The only parameter the Most High set was on Job's life. But Hasatan didn't touch her. Why was that? Understand. In all thy getting, get understanding. Now, Job's wife, if you think about it logically, had lost the same things as Job. The children that Job lost were her children too, as were the servants, as were the livestock. So the grief that she was experiencing was on the same level as Job, maybe even more, because we know women are more emotional. So she was probably more upset than Job was. And it's unimaginable to feel how Job had felt. But also it's the same for her. She felt the same way, if not worse, that all these things have happened, all these calamities, all these tragedies. Yet Hasatan didn't touch her. He didn't do a thing to her. Why was that? Eventually, when Job was afflicted with sickness during the second round of testing, his wife also had to endure seeing her husband, the person she loved, suffer. So not only has she seen all her children killed, not only has she seen all her servants and maidservants killed, not only has she seen all the livestock and their business destroyed, she's now had to endure seeing her husband covered with boils from head to toe. She's still in her full health, but she's enduring this testing, she's enduring this tempting as well as Job, and it was too much for her. She experienced and shared all Job's grief firsthand, and that was her final straw. And now her emotions were stirred up, and this was the point she was vulnerable and susceptible to being directly deceived by Hasatan and used by him. And this is what she said. Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse Allah and die. This was Hasatan speaking directly through the woman. The very thing that Hasatan had said to the Most High in the beginning, the exact dialogue saying that Job would curse him to his face, is what he made Job's wife speak. And he even got her to say the same thing the Most High said when the Most High said, despite you testing Job, he still holds fast his integrity. Hasatan even got Job's wife to say that. Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse Allah and die. That is what Hasatan kept Job's wife alive for. Because he knew her weakness. He knew if he afflicted her emotions, she would get it wrong and she would do the one thing you should never do, curse the Most High. He wanted Job to speak that. Now he knew Job on his own would not have said that. But if he could use the woman, give her the same amount of grief as Job had, and then keep her till the very end, he would be able to get her to speak it. And maybe if she spoke it to Job,
Job would listen to her and then do the same thing. And then Hasatan would be able to say to the Most High, see, I told you your servant would curse you to your face. But praise Yahweh that even during his affliction, Job held fast his integrity and put his wife in her place by saying, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. What? Shall we receive good at the hands of Allah, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. So Job held his integrity. He was under immense grief that you cannot imagine. And his wife, the one he loved, the last one left, turned against him and told him to curse the Most High and die. Yet he held fast his integrity. He put his wife in her place, telling her she's speaking as a foolish woman speaking. And it says that at the end of all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now understand something. Job did not sin with his lips, but he was sorely grieved at his heart. And Job's heart caused him to have a misunderstanding of the Most High and why he was going through his challenges. If you read the rest of the story and see the dialogue between him and his 4 friends eventually, you can see that Job, although spoke many things that were correct, there was a lot of misunderstanding he had. And at the end of it all, when the Most High then revealed himself to Job and challenged Job as to the things that he knew, which was nothing compared to the Most High, Job had to repent in sackcloth and ashes, in dust and ashes. And the Most High then restored him double all the things he lost, because Job retained his integrity all throughout. But you can see here where it says Job did not sin with his lips, meaning that he had thoughts that were incorrect, and any incorrect thought against the Most High is sin. He repented in the end, not for sinning with his lips, because he never sinned with his lips, but for the incorrect opinion and understanding of the Most High he had. He repented. So we have to understand that what Job did here is, even though he had those thoughts, and even though he was grieved at his heart, and even though he was upset and in dismay about what had happened to him being a righteous man, as righteous as you can get, as the Most High explains at the beginning of the chapter 1, he retained his integrity. He held his emotion, and he didn't allow how he was feeling inside to come out of his mouth. That's why it says he did not sin with his lips, because his emotion that he had, which we all have as human beings, was in check, whereas his wife's emotions were stirred up. They were not in check. She was not in control anymore. She had lost control. She had lost her ability. And that is just the way men and women are designed. So it's very clear here what was going on between Job and his wife. It's very clear why Hasatan kept her alive and spoke through her. Her being the weaker vessel, he afflicted her. He knew she wouldn't handle it. He knew that she would sin, and he believed, he was wrong, praise Yah for that, but he believed that she could get Job to sin, and he couldn't. He couldn't get her to get Job to sin. So Job retained his integrity. And the Most High then begins to speak to Job later on in the chapter, correcting his understanding. And at the end of it, Job repented. He said, I've spoken things that I should not have, and therefore I repent in sackcloth and ashes. He realized that he doesn't understand the things he thought he understood, and the Most High is still in charge of all things. And Job made a statement that I love, a statement that I hold dear to my heart, when he said in Job chapter 13 verse 15, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him, but I will maintain my own ways before him. He will retain his integrity before the Most High. He will not sin against him, though he be slain. Now Job didn't understand. He didn't have the benefit of what we have, that we read the story. It's not the Most High that afflicted Job. It's Hasatan that afflicted him. Job didn't understand that, because as far as he was concerned, he didn't do anything wrong. But that's why he said, though he slay me, i.e., although the Most High is punishing me, yet I will trust in him, but I will maintain my own ways before him. he will retain his integrity. So this is a wonderful story, an example of how we, when we go through trials, tribulations, testing, this is how we should respond. And believe me, nobody could have more grief than what Job had, because he lost it all. And praise be to Yah, by the end of Job's story, he was restored more than what he lost. But he had to endure some things.
So that's the end of the Q&A. Thank you all for your questions. Continue to send them in. And as the Ruach leads, we will attempt to answer them on the next series, which will be back when Yah is willing. To all those that are his, may Yah bless you and keep you.